Chapter 29. Show Yourself. Earlier, Rayleigh walked towards the Arius Palace after he left Finley and Gemma, hands crossed at the wrists behind his back, boots scuffing through the grass, whistling as if he didn't have a care in the world. He was in a good mood. A very good mood, actually. Being with the two humans had been invigorating. Their delight in his magic and interest in the Kindreth had been something he'd not known he was missing. Had he been a little free with the information he'd given Finley about the Night Elves, and especially about Vex? Maybe. But Finley would learn what Declan was eventually, maybe sooner rather than later. He didn't see Declan keeping this type of secret from his best friend and found brother forever. Besides, if Declan really was as ignorant of his past as he seemed, he'd need someone to confide in and count on. Finley was it. And Finley appeared a good choice, especially since he seemed to have a refreshing admiration for some parts of Kindreth society. He wouldn't turn away from Declan like how he knew so many others would for a night elf. Like Aquilin might. Like he would. Rayleigh quashed down that flicker of hope that sometimes flared up in his chest that he could confide in Aquilin the truth about who he was, what his past had been like, and all the conflicting feelings he had about it. When he allowed himself to think about it at all, perhaps it was talking about Vex and the Kindreth that had turned his path from the palace to the forest, where Seath and Leisha had died. But for certain, his original intention was to go to the palace, find out what room he had been assigned, and then change it to something much, much better. If he knew Veslin's pettiness, and there was no bottom to it, it likely meant he had been put in the basement with no windows, which, as a Kindreth, was actually preferable. But what was powerful was something altogether different. He would have a room on the east side of the palace with full views of the rising of the sun just below where Aquilin's rooms would undoubtedly be. Would it be uncomfortable at times? Yes. His Adiva protected him, but his nature was darkness, and he couldn't completely fight that attraction or need for the cool embrace of the night. Yet, as he had walked opposite the place where Seath and Leisha had been killed, his steps slowed, and then his direction changed. Beyond speaking of Vex, there were other reasons that encouraged him to go there now. He had thought to go late that night and perform the spells necessary to determine as much as possible about the killer. But now that he had agreed to help Finley with the game, that would eat into that time. There would likely be drinking and partying afterwards, which he would be ill-graced to leave, and his own nature would make it almost impossible to. His mother had always said he was too indulgent and that his delight and pleasure would be the end of him. While he tried to forget most of what she had said to him, he hadn't forgotten this. It was his weakness. So he was going to split the difference. He would go to the woods now and party later. No need to have to fight himself to leave a good time. He veered towards the woods and started to pull power from all around him. A little from the grass, a little from the air, a little from the flowers, even a little from the dome that immediately adjusted to fuel itself back up. Unlike the poor flowers which wilted, or the grass that became yellow, or the chill that caused the air to crackle with frost. Arve drew magic completely from their own immortal life source, but Kindreth supplemented their power from the environment and other people. Normally, people who were bled or fully outright sacrificed. He had never resorted to bleeding or killing. He thought it was weak and showed a lack of imagination. One of the most important things he had ever learned and leaned heavily upon to this day was using magic efficiently. He wasted nothing. He wove his spells with tight, thin lines of power that made sure every single bit of them worked towards his end goal. Nothing flashy, nothing unnecessary. The impact of the spell was the end result. Hence, Gran, who not only looked like an old human woman, but felt like one and smelled like one. This was what allowed him to do many elaborate spells that others could not, and do them one after another. It was what would allow him to perform a divining spell after that transformation spell that had turned him into Gran, and that was after he had enchanted Declan's Adiva, all in one day. He wasn't tired from it at all, and he wouldn't be even after he was done, because of his diligence and discipline, something his mother had never had. She splashed power about as if that was the point and not the spell. How many had she killed to create her greatest magics? Well, there was that one time she'd literally emptied their estate of prisoners and servants. After that, he made an effort not to get to know anyone that worked for his family, for they might be taken at a moment's notice from him. And if he cared for them, then he might have to act against his parents and older sister. He hadn't been ready for that, not even by the time he'd fled. He reached the tree line, and the boughs curled over him almost like a protective embrace. He looked up at the dark green leaves that rustled in the wind. There was still a good amount of daylight left, as it was only mid-afternoon, but the canopy was thick and blocked out much of the sunlight. The divining spell should work. He might have to use a bit more power than otherwise, but he was confident he would determine what, or who, was responsible for Seath and Leisha's untimely demise. He allowed his senses to spread out ahead and around him. He already knew that Commander Severin and his group of protectors were gone from the area, as though there were more protectors patrolling the edge of the dome around Tyrael. The commander himself was nowhere to be seen, and he wouldn't have left a crime scene early. His senses confirmed that there were no Arave present. In fact, there wasn't a whole lot of life present here at all, which was strange in and of itself. There should have been insects churring and clicking, the rustling of small animals as they nosed their way through the underbrush, the louder snapping and cracking as larger creatures lumbered between the trees. But there was nothing. It was eerily silent. A Kindrith has been here. That thought came unbidden into his mind and stuck there as if cemented. He was trying to keep an open mind, not allow his fears to get the better of him. It wasn't that he was afraid of this unknown Kindrith, if they existed at all, but what their presence could threaten, especially if, as seemed obvious, they weren't fitting into Arave's society quite as well as they should. Declan's ignorance was one thing, but the boy was keeping a relatively low profile. But killing Arave right outside the dome and cutting out their tongues, what are they thinking? It was sloppy. It was careless. It was practically begging the Arave to actually remember their history and figure out that a night elf was fluttering around out here. He could not abide that. Again, once one Kindrith was found, there would be a witch hunt for others. People already suspected him of having Kindrith blood. The Nares would crack under pressure if questioned. He was certain of that. In order to save themselves, they would out him. And where would he go if that happened? His life was here now, with Aquilin and all the rest. It wasn't just that it was comfortable and agreeable to him, but, if he were honest, it was the one place he felt semi-safe from Vex. Aquilin was powerful. The Sun Elves were the natural enemies of the Night Elves. Vex would be risking a war coming for him here. He was hiding in Aquilin's shadow. Is this Kindrith doing the same thing? Hiding amongst the Arve to escape the purge, but unable to control themselves? That didn't sit right with him, and he never allowed himself to think just one way and not explore all the other possibilities. So he forced himself to put aside the idea of sloppiness and lack of control to consider the exact opposite. What if this Kindrith was in control? What if they understood exactly what they were risking, but did it anyway? That would mean that they were powerful. So powerful that they weren't worried at all about being found out. Or maybe that they even intended to be found out. That would more likely explain how they had avoided his notice the night before. No, that just can't be. The only people that powerful are family. And besides myself, none made it out. Vex made sure of that, and Aquil and I slaughtered Volray and others. It was how he had known to flee, the first death, the first whisper of a coup. He still did not understand why Lady Ashrin Zinzadoral decided to go against Vex. They'd had a relationship that had soured, yes, but they'd been on again and off again for millennia. Why had she been determined to kill Vex when his power seemed so unassailable? Had been unassailable. Whatever her reasons, he had no idea. But he'd known he'd be blamed for them, being a part of it. His whole family had been marked for a purge, and so he'd run far and fast, and never turned back. He hadn't even warned his parents or elder sister. His mother was likely proud of him for that, even if he wasn't. But there had been no time, no way. Or so he told himself. Rayleigh shook off the sudden gloom that had come upon him. He made a point of not thinking of the past. It was done and gone, and nothing good ever came of wallowing. Besides, his family would not have thought of him at all had their positions been reversed. He continued walking silently into the forest, letting his senses guide him to where Seath and Leisha had been sacrificed. But even if he'd only used the power of his 5 senses and none of the void, he would have known the location when he saw it. The trees where they'd undoubtedly been attached by the ankles and the wrists were blackened and dead. The bark looked scalded as if by high heat. There were no leaves on the limbs. They'd all died in a moment and fluttered lifelessly to the ground, where they now formed a thick covering of the forest floor. Carefully, Rayleigh stepped onto the dead leaves and made his way to the very center of the area that was now open to the sky. He crouched down and saw 2 small drops of ruby red blood on leaves that must have been directly beneath the Arave's bodies. This was not sloppiness. This showed precision. A single drop of blood to the gods, a mockery of sacrifice to them, while the Kindrith kept the majority of the blood for themselves. He had seen plenty of sacrifice sites. His mother and father had black metal frames in the basement of their estates, where victims were strung up and bled dry over time. Old and fresh blood patterned the frames and floor of those rooms. Buckets of blood dripped as they were carried to the spell sites. Again, like when his mother practiced magic, the whole point was the waste of it all. She had plenty to spare, so she didn't need to be parsimonious. Other people's lives were nothing to her, and there were plenty that she could take because of her position. Did that mean this Kindrith was not in as powerful a position as his mother? That he or she or they needed to budget the precious liquid of life? He didn't think so. What he felt here as his senses probed and prodded the remnants of magic was someone who was expert, someone who wasn't flashy, but who knew exactly what they were doing. Dangerous, he realized. Whoever this is, they are incredibly dangerous. The hair on the back of his neck was lifted. For a moment, he thought of running again. But that was foolish. This was his life. He had his friends, which were growing. Finley, Gemma, and Declan's faces flashed before his mind's eye. He had things to look forward to. The image of friendly knights at Helgrim's Inn floated before him. He imagined he felt a line of warmth by his side, and he looked over to see Finley's face there. Finley. How odd. He should have imagined Aquilin or someone else, but that studious, normally dubious face, or at least dubious when it looked at him, was open and smiling. He felt something stir in his chest. Definitely odd. He shook himself. He needed to get this done and dusted. Remaining here too long was a bad idea. He willed another of his blood weapons to his hand. A dagger called Quirrell, which meant quick and deadly, appeared in his left hand. The weight of the silver hilt, inlaid with black poisonwood and tipped with a curled silvery blade that glowed like starlight, was comforting. Quirrell had been his first blood weapon, one that he'd created when cornered in the Underdark by a Rasper, which was a creature much like a centipede, but 1,000 times the Earth's size, with poisonous pincers on every foot. He'd managed to impale the damn thing to the cavern wall just before it struck him, hence Quirrell, quick and deadly. Unlike many of his family, he did not have many blood weapons. They often came from deep grief, utter terror, or blasting rage. Raelif strove not to let his emotions lead him, too messy, too uncertain. But those he did make, he loved and treasured. His sister had always scoffed at his lack of them. Her body was crisscrossed with weaponry, each more powerful than the next. He had teased her that she would run out of space before she ran out of ambition. "Your tongue is your greatest weapon, little brother," she had said dryly, "but do know that it is very easy to cut out." Now he sank down on the forest floor with Quirrell in his hands, and the 2 leaves with Lisha and Seath's blood dropped upon them. Despite the trees above him being bare, sunlight seemed to avoid this space. This was good. He gripped Quirrell's hilt in his right hand and drew the blade across his left palm. There was a familiar sharp sting and the welling of crimson. He clenched his left hand into a fist and squeezed his own blood out of it, letting it patter over the already stained leaves. "Oceans of time before me and behind me. Bring me the drop of a moment, a flicker." He spoke the incantation to divine the past in the ancient tongue of the Kindreth, Litherel. "Show me what happened here when the moon was full. Show me when blood was spilt here and 2 souls were consigned to the dark." His eyes shut as he finished the spell. He felt the world turn, even with his eyelids closed. When the spinning sensation stopped, he slowly opened his eyes. No longer was it afternoon, it was night, and he let out a sigh of pleasure as the darkness washed over him. But that sound was drowned out by choked cries. Raelif was up on his feet in less time than it took to register the sound, Quirrell held in his hand, ready to fight. But then he reminded himself that he wasn't really here, not at this moment of time. His breath frosted the air. It was so cold. Magic. Kindreth magic. So much of it. The choked cry sounded again. He spun towards it and felt his stomach clench. Seath and Lisha were suspended from the trees, which were not dead yet. They were upside down, their legs and arms spread wide. Neither of them were hurt. Yet. Tears and snot were rolling down Seath's face. It was from him that the cry had come. He was literally whimpering. A whispered prayer was being muttered by Lisha. Despite having nothing restricting them from screaming for help, neither attempted it. "Why aren't you yelling your heads off?" Raelif asked them, though he did not expect an answer. He was not here. He was merely seeing the past. He scanned the forest all around them. His night vision would have shown him anyone nearby, but he saw not a thing. The moonlight and starlight filtered down through the trees, illuminated the space. Seath continued to quietly sob and Lisha to pray. "Where are you?" Raelif muttered. The utter chill should have meant that the Kindreth was right there. Was this but an echo of their magic? Again, Raelif felt a chill of another kind. Too powerful. This Kindreth was too powerful. "Who are you?" Raelif asked. No answer, of course. But the spell knew what he wanted to see and understand. His questions were really for his own subconscious. "Show me what I need to see. Tell me what I want to know. Reveal your secrets." "We're sorry," Seath snorted out suddenly. Stop, Seath, Leisha said, her voice full of dread. It will do no good. We're sorry, Seath cried louder, ignoring her. We didn't know. What didn't you know? Raelif asked. We'll say nothing. We'll leave and never come back, Seath promised the unknown killer. Seath, it's over. He won't let us go. Leisha let out a laugh that had a hysterical ring to it. He? Who was he? There was a snap of a branch somewhere to his right. The two Ereve went stiff, and then Seath was sobbing in sheer terror. Leisha was praying, but the words were getting mixed up. Something about the sun bowing to the night, something about darkness falling forever. Show yourself, Raelif demanded. Raelif's eyes scanned the forest. He walked as far as he could towards the sound, but there was a limit to how far he could venture with the spell. Already it was getting hazy around him, and he retreated. But then he stopped. He froze. Someone was there. Someone was behind him. The metallic taste of fear flooded Raelif's mouth. But that was foolish. He was seeing the past. He wasn't in the past. The killer was not truly there. Not with him, not... Show myself, a voice whispered in the cusp of his right ear. Perhaps it is time that you show yourself. Something cold as death went through Raelif. He gasped. His hands were at his throat. He was back in the present, in the glade. It was daylight. Thank the gods. He was alone. There was no one. A snap of a branch had him spinning around, Quirrell ready to stab. But it wasn't any evil killer standing there between two tree trunks. It was Finley. Raelif let out a sob laugh. Finley, you scared me. What are you? Kindrith, Finley whispered and lifted a shaking hand. What? Where? Raelif swirled around to look behind him, for Finley was pointing behind him. Wasn't he? But as he moved, he caught sight of his hair. His white hair. No. Show yourself. He slowly turned back to Finley. The young man had taken a few steps towards him. His eyes were huge behind his glasses. Raelif, you're a night elf.
The best laid plans of mice and men end up the same way. In shit! They don't go right at all. And here we have Raelif being so careful to keep himself hidden, only to be discovered and his secret laid bare. We all knew that sometime this was going to come out. But it did in the worst way possible. Well, maybe the worst way would be Aquilyn coming upon him in this copse of trees, but it was Finley. What do you think Finley's and Raelif's reactions to Raelif being a night elf are going to be? You're going to find out in the next chapter, but I'm just dying to see what you think now. Who's going to be a Cassandra about this and figure it out? Please put it in the comments. Can't wait to hear what you guys think. Can't wait to hear what you guys react to next week when we find out what happens. Thanks so much.